Okay. Erev Tov, Shana Tova. Hello to those who are watching us and those who are watching us later on YouTube or listening to us. Um, this is our last session. So thank you for all for joining us either online or later on through our recordings on the website or elsewhere. What we'll do today is we're going to talk about providence, Hashgacha. And we talked a lot in the last 5 sessions about different areas, different problems, different possibilities, new avenues, new pathways that postmodernism opens for us. But there is a problem. The Jewish belief is also based on Hashgacha, even on personal Hashgacha. And it's true that the Rambam, and we'll see it throughout the Shiur, was a bit on the opposing side to it. But in general, Hashgacha is a big part of our religious belief. Okay? And in our very scientific, very realistic, very hyper modern or postmodern reality, we rarely encounter Hashgacha, providence in our daily lives. And we, a lot of times, when we see somebody that says, "Oh, I had a miracle," or "Oh, I talked to God," or whatever, we tend to think of them either as, old grandpa, or at worst as crazy. Okay, so what we'll try to see today is how do we reconcile the two, and should we reconcile the two? What does Hashgacha mean today? So I'm um, screen sharing, so I'm sharing my screen with the source sheet. It was also sent on the WhatsApp group, and it's also available. You can access it by contacting us or on the website. So we're starting not from a very postmodern thinker, actually somebody that was, I'll even say, modern thinker opposing postmodernity. That's Rav Soloveitchik. Okay, and his very precise description of Hashgacha and how we reconcile the two, and then we'll open from there. I'm reading. Posing the questions of suffering claims Judaism is possible in two separate dimensions: the dimension of fate and the dimension of destiny. In the realm of destiny, man recognizes reality as it is, and does not desire to use harmonizing formulas in order to hide and disregard evil. The child of destiny, quotes, is very realistic and does not flinch in anticipation of a face-to-face confrontation with evil. His approach is halachic, okay, and moral, and thus devoid of any metaphysical speculative nuance. In this dimension, the emphasis is removed from casual and teleological considerations, and is directed to the realm of action. The problem is now formulated in the language of a simple halacha and resolves around the quotidian, daily task. The question of questions, she'elat ha'she'elot. What does suffering obligate man to do? Okay, so Rav Soloveitchik solution to Hashgacha, to providence, and it's very much like many solutions of Rav Soloveitchik, okay, is we're separating our reality into different areas, okay, and we're basically using two realms, two separate dimensions, okay, one of fate and one of destiny, okay. This is a modern construct, okay. It's not new, it's traditional. I mean, we had that before, definitely, but it's modern in the sense of how we articulate it, okay, and how we think about it as two very separate parallel lines that will never meet, okay. In a postmodern reality, it's more challenging. Why? Because we don't believe in parallel lines. We believe in spots, right? Multiple truths, different narratives, stories, and that it's challenging. Okay, our challenge is different. So I'm not really delving into Soloveitchik here. I'm assuming we know this. If we don't, I of course encourage all of you to read Soloveitchik more and to read more about it. But I want to use this as an opening to what's different in Rav Shagar, in Berkovits, and other solutions we'll see. So why do we need different solutions, and what is different about them? Okay, from how we are used to see orthodoxy, how we're used to see religiosity. Okay, so that was just an opening. That's why I'm not delving too much into this. Okay, so I'm starting with Rav Shagar, my faith. Okay, in what sense do I believe in divine providence? Do I believe, for example, that a person who slips on a banana peel is being punished because one of the mezuzahs in his house is defective? Although some reject such a view of providence, Maimonides, for instance, many Orthodox Jews think that to believe in divine providence is to posit a system of causality that competes with the natural world, one whose mechanism is reward and punishment, and the kind of petty reckonings often invoked by some rabbis. When I got married, I have to tell you this story. When I got married, I had Hadlachat Chatanim, right? There's like, it's grooms, initiation, I don't know how you'll translate it into proper English. Hadlachat Chatanim, you meet this rabbi. He's not your yeshiva rabbi, he's somebody from the Rabbanut. Not everybody goes through it. It depends on the city you live in and how it's politically structured. It's not interesting. But anyway, I met this guy, rabbi. It is, I don't know, probably 70s, 80s. He's wise. He's not, he's not a simple man off the street. He knows his Torah, he knows his Mishnah, he has life experience. However, throughout in the beginning, he said something like, "This guy died this guy died of cancer because he wasn't observing Shabbat." And I was like restraining myself. And then he used another example. And I said, there's a lot of people that are observing Shabbat and they still die of cancer. Right? And vice versa. So it wasn't halachat chatanim, there was no groom initiation. We talked for an hour and a half about this. And I'm not saying it as lashon hara chas v'chalila or looking from above or anything, but for him it was eminent. It was something inexcusable, incomprehensible that somebody could be religious or not, or even frum or traditional even, and not to believe in Hashgacha, in providence. Very personal. Okay, it exists. It exists like it was painful for him. Bemet that I argued with him, and I argued not because I like to argue. I mean, I like to argue. That's true. But that was not the point. It was hard for me that he was really believing in this. So the meeting between those point of views is real. That's like real religious discussions that are taking place. In rejecting such a conception, must we adopt Goldman's opinion that providence has only normative implications, meaning that we are under halachic obligation to treat calamities as punishments for our sins and repent, and to treat positive occurrences as gifts from God that require a thing? I think not. And such an approach does away with the basic religious significance of providence, the perception of God's guiding hand in reality. Okay, I want to jump to a story Rav Shagar writes here, and he told in many occasions. Here is an example from something that happened to me this morning. Our boiler cracked and the house flooded. Was it providence? Maimonides asserts that we must examine our actions when a calamity occurs. It may have been fairly minor, as calamities go, a boiler, but it was annoying nonetheless. However, such an examination means asking myself not why it happened, but rather, what does it mean? Okay, this is the important, crucial point. What does it mean? To ask why something happened is to search for a cause, but I already know the cause. Over time, the heating element became encrusted in limescale and rust, forming a crack, perhaps because I had failed to maintain it correctly. Yet, when I asked myself, what does it mean? I had a revelation. Perhaps I hadn't given enough tzedakah. Maybe I should repent, I thought. But can that truly be the meaning of a calamity? Such interpretations would be utterly arbitrary, if not for the sense of certainty that accompanies them. The event merges with other occurrences, snippets of thoughts, impressions, and more. It strikes one as a revelation, an epiphany even, unlike the newspaper's unrelenting interpretations of the events that befall us. This one does not grasp at external reasons. It is a revelation not of my own design, rather it grabs me. Okay? Meaning the boiler cracked. Okay? Why does it crack? Because boiler cracks. I mean, it's occurrence, right? You don't maintain it, you don't clean it every 2-3 years. Eventually it will crack. Okay, that's one thing. That's the scientific, that's the real life nature, casual, cause and effect world. But there's also another point here. What meaning do I ascribe to it? Okay, that is different, because it doesn't mean the boiler cracked because I didn't give tzedakah. It does mean the fact that the boiler cracked can cause me to remember to give more tzedakah. It's not the same thing. Okay, I'll finish this and then I'll pause. Employing Freudian terms, we may ask, who says we must submit our worldview to the reality principle that's behind the scientific approach? Is not the fantasy that characterizes the pleasure principle far more real? In Hasidic tradition, this faith is often identified with the sense of wonder, pli'ah. That comes with glimpsing the world of miracles, of the fantastic, which lies behind the curtain of everyday reality, beyond nature. Meaning, there's sort of, it's like a puppet show, okay? But it's not a puppet show in the sense we are brought up in Hebrew school or in day school or in wherever we went to, Talmud Torah, wherever we went to. Meaning, we are puppets, or the world is our puppets, or we're all puppets. And the Lord and God, Hashem, is sort of the master of the puppets, and we just need to understand we will never see the puppet master. Okay, it's different. Meaning, we see the world as puppets. Okay, the strings, the puppet master, all of that. That's the nature. There are rules. Okay. However, there's also the reason, the thoughts that the puppet master is thinking. We can't access it. We know we can't access it. Okay? We don't even have a fantasy we can access it, because I can't even access the thoughts of anyone here in the session. Okay? It's impossible. What I can do is understand there are also other thoughts. And I can try to understand what's happening as something that should also trigger thoughts with myself, within me. Okay. Any comments, questions so far? Okay, so I'm continuing. I want us to go to Rav Berkovits, okay? Because there's also, this is all nice when a boiler cracks, okay? But in reality, we really meet other problems. As I told you from my story, people get sick. I mean, just now, we're in the midst of a horrible plague, but man, it's frightening. And I don't know how the situation is in the States, in Canada, currently, where each of you is living. But in Israel, and certainly Jerusalem is the epicenter of the plague, of the corona in Israel, it's frightening. 1 in every 5 people is tested positive. I mean, it's really frightening to go outside. So it's not always a boiler. Sometimes there's real things that are problematic. What do you do? So I'm reading. Not for a single moment shall we entertain the idea that what happened to European Jewry, of course during the Holocaust, was divine punishment for any sins committed by them. It was injustice absolute. It was injustice countenanced, not sure how to read this, I'm sorry, by God. But if we hold on to our faith in a personal God, such absolute injustice cannot be a mere mishap in the divine scheme of things. Somehow there must be room for it in the scheme, in which case the ultimate responsibility for this ultimate evil must be God's. How could we reconcile it? Such is God. He is a God who hides himself. El mistater. Okay? Man may seek him and he will not be found. Lo yimatzeh. Okay? It's all from the Gemara. Man may call to him and he may not answer. God's hiding his face in this case is not a response to man. Okay? It's not that God is hiding himself because we're doing something, but a quality of being assumed by God on his own initiative. God is not determined in advance that one person's be a tzaddik and another a rasha. But unless the possibility existed for a man to be a rasha, if he so desires, one could not only not be a rasha, one could not be a tzaddik either. Meaning, if there's no chance of becoming bad, there's no chance of becoming good. God cannot, as a rule, intervene whenever man's use of freedom displeases him. It is true. If he did so, the perpetration of evil would be rendered impossible, but so would the possibility for good disappear. Okay, I'm jumping a bit. Using it, he will often use it wrongly. He will decide for the wrong alternative, man. As he does so, there will be suffering for the innocent. Meaning, according to Rav Berkovits, okay, there's no Hashgacha. Okay? Because when we have Hashgacha, personal Hashgacha, punishment, mamash, on evil, and rewards on good at this world, I'm only talking about this world, this reality, and olam hazeh. There's no humanity. The concept of humanity demands us to believe in a world, according to Rav Berkovits, which is a very frum, right, orthodox thinker, to live in a world without Hashgacha. Okay? Unlike Rav Soloveitchik, unlike Rav Shagar, and we'll soon see more from Rav Shagar, Rav Berkovits' solution is to make Hashgacha, personal Hashgacha, void. And that's a solution that not only exists in our world, but also, I think, unaware, at least in the Litvak Yeshivish world in the States and in the religious Zionist world, and some of the Litvak world, in the Haredi world here in Israel, at least until, let's say, 20 years ago or 10 years ago in both centers, that was the common sense for the Orthodox. Everybody knew of Soloveitchik's idea. Everybody knew there's Hashgacha in the Rambam and Midot. Everybody knew the stories in the Torah. Everybody believed in it. Some were here. But in real life, in practice, how the shuls went, what the discussions were at the Shabbat table, that was the reality. There's no personal Hashgacha. Okay? When we became a bit more Hasidic, not sociological, but in our thought, okay, then also when we became more postmodern, meaning we didn't ascribe our reality as truth, but we ascribed it as our own story, as a narrative, we became more open to the idea of personal Hashgacha, maybe even demanding it. Okay? Okay, comments so far on Berkovits or on the nuances before and after. Okay, so I'm jumping in. Okay, going back to Rav Shagar, this is the part parts of Chance and Providence, Lessons for Poor. Okay, it's a book that exists also in English. It's a very old. It's one. I think it's the oldest Shagar translation to English. It's, I think about 10, 15 years ago. Okay. I'll read. The book repeats this depiction throughout the book. The exactingness is combined with the famous Persian bureaucracy. Okay, and this is important here. The bureaucracy. In a bureaucratic state, there's no individual, right? Everybody are numbers, which itself does not escape the irony and the joke of the Megillah unscathed. The runners and riders, okay, of the king's steeds go to and fro, carrying messages from Haman one time and from Mordechai the next. This state is a state of law, and an edict, this is important, that has been written in the king's name and sealed with the king's signet may not be revoked. Okay? Meaning there are rules, and the king here is HaMelech, okay? According to this interpretation. HaMelech. So it's not the Hashgacha, it's Hashem. So once Hashem rules something, that's what's happening. Why? What's happening? Indeed, Hasidic texts see the phrase just so, kacha, and everybody had been to Israel. No, kacha. That's the most common answer for everything. Okay? Lama zeh, why is this? What? Kacha. Because so. As standing at the center of the Megillah, so shall be done for the man whom king desires to honor. The use of so is not accidental. They further expounded the word so, kacha, should be read with the holiness of the crown in mind. So, kacha, the Drashot Avot, is an acronym for the crown of all crowns. The crown of all crowns. The fickle caprice of this world, the baseless and meaningless rises and falls, merge with the absolute divine decree. There is no attempt to explain the different steps of the narrative individually. Rather, the entire story is shifted to a different plane. Human happenstance does not reign in the story, nor a lofty meaning that is hidden from human eyes, but the decree of the king of the universe. A king's command is authoritative, and none can say to him, "What are you doing?" Why does he do what he does? Just so, because this is what he wants. Citing their founder in Chabad, says regarding divine meaning of and reason for creating the world. Oif ateva is kain kashianit. You can't interrogate a desire. Okay? Al tachkor b'mufla b'ta'anug. I'll jump to the passionate commitment that life in its arbitrariness enable the person to escape the human framework that bind him and to cling to the divine essence. A person who accepts the divine just so, kacha, overrides conceptual human consciousness that demands explanations and justification. He accepts his life as it is in its arbitrariness. Why? Just so. Meaning, reality, Hashgacha, is basically to be committed without any certainty. Okay? Without knowing anything will happen to us. Okay? It's seeing us, our world, as a world that we can't understand it. Okay? But understanding that kacha is keter kol haktarim. If you know a bit of Kabbalah, I won't go into, I don't know how you know, well, you know, Sfirot and how, you know, Hasidut and all of those, but, and what is the keter and everything, but in general, believing that what happened didn't happen stam, meaning for no reason. The reason is divine, but we will never be able to understand it. For us, it will look arbitrary. Hashgacha, according to Rav Shagar here, is understanding in our postmodern reality that we will never be able to understand this. That within our narrative, it will be arbitrary. It will be meaningless. But there is keter kol haktarim. There is a reality that is not bureaucratic. Meaning, when you go to to get a driver license, you need to fill a form. The question seems silly. Some of the questions, and they don't make sense. And it's true, if the clerk will just talk to you, they will understand more than the form. But the form, eventually, the big metadata, I'm not going now into social science and capitalism, socialism. I'm just like in the very watered down version of it. In the metadata that the Ministry of Transportation will receive will be sufficient to understand many things that won't make sense for you individually, but will make sense in the grand scheme of drivers. So is the world. It looks like a bureaucratic system that we don't understand. Like we're just a number. Things are happening and we don't know why. But eventually, in the metadata of the world, we will understand it. Okay? It's virtually going back to Rav Soloveitchik's two worlds solution. However, the difference here is in the Hasidic approach that is allowing you to believe that your real life, your real sphere, your real in terms of real events, right? Occurring events, they are also connected to the other sphere. They're not parallels. They're sort of intertwining. Questions?
I have
Yeah.
nothing. So, less of a question and more an observation. This is very similar. I guess the power of this is that, as opposed to being the usual religious response to challenges that the world is random, you say, well, it seems that way, but you don't know whether it's random, right? Instead of trying to say that, oh, well, it's not random, look at all these things I can point out, you say, yeah, for us it does seem random, but it's really the work of a king. But in terms of on a personal level, Hashgacha Pratit, it still might feel like a king's subject, you know? It's hard to feel that a king cares about each and every individual subject all that much. King might care much more for the nation as a whole, right? That's a bit difficult.
Okay, so it's excellent questions. So first, I would say on your first question, because I think it's shorter. It sounds very similar, and of course, it draws a lot from traditional answers that we have that are very similar to this. I think the difference is the awareness to it, meaning you are aware to the fact that it's random. Tradition rarely says it's random. Okay? It says, maybe it says, there's a plan, we don't understand it. That's something we can find in many ways. But says it's random and it has a meaning, it's not something very traditional. Okay, and that's a difference. Meaning the awareness to our conception of this, the fact that we think it's meaningless or we think it's random, has a meaning, has a value. It's not without a merit, without a value to it. I'll paraphrase it differently. The fact that the world seems random to us does not negate the fact that it has a meaning. And the fact that the world has a meaning, it does not negate the fact that the world is actually random for us. Okay? Those two exist at the same time, beneshima achat, right? because my own, and here it comes to your second question, my own personal narrative is individual, and I will find myself sort of without a revelation, right? The world in Megillat Esther, we don't have a revelation. So in my own personal narrative, most likely I won't see God in the morning when I'll wake up. Okay? I'm not a prophet. I won't have this revelation. However, what I do have is the sort of the ability to understand my own personal events, like we've seen with the boiler story, as something that has a meaning. Sometimes I will try to make a meaning of it. Sometimes I'll make mistakes. Sometimes I won't try even. Sometimes I won't be aware of this. But it's individual. It's individual in the sense the king. And I won't go into Megillat Esther because it's not a shir on Purim, right? But I'll talk about what I think Rav Shagar is saying here. The king here is also a personal God, right? He's talking to the reader very specifically. He's a part of the events. He's not sort of watching over them from above. And it looks like Haman, you can read the Megillah, Haman and Mordechai and Esther, they're all playing Hashgacha. No, he's not doing anything. He's being played by all the others. But he's actually not. He's aware of what's happening. He's reading his diary, he's doing this, he's doing that. Like, he's an active player, okay? But do they understand what are his actions? Not necessarily, okay? And I'm not going into the entire Megillah. There, of course, there's a lot more to be said on the Megillah itself and on Chashboros. So I'll tell you personally, when bad things happen, when good things happen, we're very thankful. It's easy, to thank God. To say in Tefillah, Todah, is easy. Unlike the joke where man only prays when he's miserable, and when something good happens, he says, I don't need it. It's the opposite in real life, at least for me. When something good happens, I can daven and say thank you and know and see it and so on. When something negative happens, and many times it happens, not always a cataclysmic event like Corona, which changes the reality. It could be something personal. You lost a job or smaller, then it's much more difficult to see it. And then comes this individual approach when you say, okay, it's random for me, but there's still something here. Sorry. There's still something here that I don't understand, that I will never be able to, that I will never be able to understand. And nevertheless, I believe there's some meaning to it. Okay? So there's sort of a reduced revelation, I would say. Okay, it's sort of to use another story, not from the Torah. If you know the Wizard of Oz, if you read of seeing the Wizard of Oz, then there's sort of you're not talking to a real. They know they're not talking to a real magician. They know he can't bring them home, but they ask him anyway. Okay, lehavdil, okay. When we pray, we know what happened in our life and in this negative is very likely to remain because that's just how people are. That's how the world is. But nevertheless, we pray because we know God could actually help us. Unlike Berkovits. Okay, I personally don't believe in of Berkovits' solution. And at the same time, I also agree with him when he talks about the Holocaust. Okay, because everything looks right, because we live in this parallel realities, but they're tangled together. They're not parallel anymore because we live in a postmodern reality. I hope it wasn't but I hope I haven't made it more complicated. But we'll read another part from Rav Shagar, and I think it will. This paragraph will summarize it properly. Providence is the ability to see the inner sense and logic of all events. The things that happen to us can come together. The individual details create a story of a work of art. Practically speaking, this is how the Torah is revealed in the world. A person in the unfortunately rare state of providence merits understanding the meaning of his life, saving him from a sense of happenstance, mikriyut, randomness. This state feels similar to falling in love, when every event feels sharp and clear. Providence is essentially this sharpness. So when you see, unlike the Megillah, sometimes in our life we get a glimpse and we see the master plan. We see this metadata of the bureaucratic system. Suddenly we see, oh, 5 years ago I lost that job. It was horrible. Now something good happens to me. By the way, many times it's not. Maybe another thing that is negative happened to me. But I sort of understand what it brings with it, what it brings to me. So I sort of see the lines. Okay? And it's very difficult to see it because they're very, very fragile. They're very, very thin, small. Okay? When we can see them, our life gains meaning. And this is the important part. Many problems today that we see, also with the value of human life, when we see now with everything that happens with COVID, is that people are saying, well, they live 80 years, they live 90 years, whatever. It doesn't matter. What does that mean? It means everything is so random that if they gathered enough randomness, it's okay. It's accumulative, right? When you look at art, it's not accumulative. I'm not talking about the art market, but when you look at a picture, it's not accumulative. You can't count the brushstrokes or the number of the quantity of paint in there and to replicate it just from those numbers, right? It's something else. It has a lot of details. Each of them alone has different meanings. Combined, somehow, they create art. Okay? The same thing is happening when we talk about Hashgacha. Hashgacha could only be a way for us to see the world through Torah. Okay? Meaning we see how the Torah is revealed in the world, how the world is revealed in Torah, and how our life are both. Okay? And this sharpness is the revelation, is seeing God every morning. Okay, I said before, I don't see God as every morning. When you have this sharpness, when you reach this level, you see God every morning. Okay, and it's possible. That's what Rav Shagar is saying here. It's very difficult, but it's possible. Like watching art. When you go to a museum, you can see a lot of paint drawings, and you're like, okay, set up. But you can also see something else. There's this famous story about Rav Kook, right? He writes in his letter, I don't know if you know the story. So Rav Kook was stuck in World War I in England. And what do you do when you're stuck in a foreign country? You go to the museums. So he spent a lot of time in the National Gallery. And he always looked at Rembrandt. And he writes in his journals that Rembrandt captured something from Ora Ganuz, mamash. Not as a, poetic stanza, but really that Rembrandt was actually painting with orot gnuzim, with spiritual lights that were created with creation of the world. Art has something real that when you combine it, it has a spiritual effect of revelation. Our life, our mundane, regular life, has the same attributes. We just need to see it, and it's very, very challenging. And that's Why Hashgacha is challenging in our world? Because our postmodern reality enables us to see it. So we can be frustrated. Because if you know art, then you're much more frustrated if you don't see the magic of it. If you don't know it, you're less frustrated. Okay. I want us to go to our last part of Rav Shagar. Today I'm jumping, by the way, on Rav Nachmans' shiur that he's interpreting here, but it's in the source sheet if you want to read it later. And he says this. Given our explanation, it is possible to understand Rav Nachman's emphasis here on faith in the sages, having previously spoken about the higher Torah Ilah, as the true foundation of the world. Rav Nachmans now turns to the oral Torah, which emerges from the sage's ability to interpret Torah. It is through the oral Torah, alone, that things in the world gain a spiritual meaning. They bring the world out of chaos. Faith in the sages, then, is faith in the Torah, which gives the world its reality. Without this faith, the grasses could not heal. According to the postmodern perspective described above, without faith in the rules of the game of medicine, it could not function. Science too depends on this faith, on the willingness to accept the rules of the game. Therefore, there's an aspect of self-nullifications in science as well. Meaning, what do we see today? We see it, sadly. People that are saying, we don't listen to what the scientists are saying about the virus. We're not putting masks, we're not doing anything, are also being affected by it in real life. They are infected, okay? Meaning the ways of the scientific world to protect them are not working if they're not believing and playing the game of the scientific world. The scientific world cannot coerce them to be healed. It's just not possible. Okay? The above is true with regards to a spiritual dimension as well. In order for Torah learning to affect and live in a person, there must be a faith in the holiness of the Torah and its ability to have an effect. Same thing, you can't read Torah and assume it will do something if you don't believe in Torah, if you don't follow the rules. The influence of Torah learning is not objective. It is dependent on the receiver. Someone outside of the religious framework who does not believe in the Torah's holiness will undoubtedly be affected by it in a form altogether different from that of a believer. Okay? It's not the same. I'm jumping a bit. This is a very complicated point. On one hand, it is difficult to believe that nothing is objective, that everything is the result of an act of our creation or construction, even as we assign these things absolute validity. As was said previously, every framework that we fashion for ourselves has an aspect of interpretation and creation. Everything we do is something we interpret, something new we create. Even faith at its core is a decision. I have chosen to have a certain lifestyle, and in doing so, to express my faith in God. For example, I've decided to pray. At that moment, I must assign great weight to this decision. There must be a feeling of responsibility if I don't pray. If I don't pray, my spiritual world will be ruined, and this carries an element of sin. Of course, the matter is not simple at all. If I'm aware that this decision is my own, I may feel a lack of obligation. Okay? It's a circle. I may feel that there is a possibility of making it work. If I don't pray today, I'll pray tomorrow. This approach is based in the feeling that things rely on me. I'm the center because I'm constructing reality. I'm the mashgiach and the mushgach. Because I'm reading it, because I have interpreted the divine reality in a certain way. If it is all an interpretation, then I may not feel the aspect of obligation. And yet, we must be aware that although man is endowed with the ability of creation, the fashioning of a world, the created world is entirely real. Meaning, not only are we creating a world, we're creating a world that is real. We see a sharpened reality that many times is a reality we've constructed. It's not even divine before it was constructed. But when we constructed it as divine, it is divine. I'm reading. The Chassid must have faith that if the Rebbe interprets the Torah in a particular manner, he has created a way for Torah to exist. The Chassid's faith in the actuality of his world is essential for them to be real. Moreover, we must understand that without the Torah interpretation of tzaddikim, the Torah does not have meaning. There is no written Torah without oral Torah. We must understand that on the one hand, Torah is created from our powers and interpretation and creativity. On the other hand, it is divine and creates spiritual worlds. It follows that of Nachman's form of faith in the sages gains a double meaning. It is both a faith in the sages, but also a faith in the very notion of an oral Torah, in mankind's ability to create Torah. Meaning, Hashgacha in a postmodern world is what? Hashgacha is the fact that the receiver, the mushgach, the fact that we receive, right, those messages, those abilities to see the world, we are becoming the makers, the creators. Okay, we are now creating the framework in which we are constructing ourselves to be within a providence set of mind. Okay. Questions before I'll try to encapsulate this and summarize, if there are. Okay. I think the difference from this and Rav Soloveitchik in the beginning, and also in terms of some of the traditional aspects, of course, not all of them, it is more staggering. Meaning what? Again, all the things here are not only relying on Rav Nachman was also relying on others before him, and so on and so on and so on. You can find everything already in the Gemara, if not in the Torah itself. However, the difference here is a difference not only of awareness, but also of constructingness, if that's a word. We have the ability in a postmodern reality, not only, and this is also where we finish our 6 sessions, and I think it's a good closure for our sessions. The idea of postmodern Judaism, postmodern Jewish halachic lifestyles, or any other name we want to ascribe to this, is not only that we live in a reality where we have multiple narratives and we switch between them within our lives, between people, between communities, and so on. It's also that we are constructing those narratives. And we are the makers, we are the creators of the Jewish narrative that is obligating us to be within the narrative. Not only we are obligated to be within it, we are also really gaining access to the divine and gaining access to understanding how the world functions in terms of Hashgacha, in terms of providence, in terms of good and evil, and so on. However, or not however, at the same time, this awareness does not negate the fact that we are also constructing this world in our own image, in our own mind. Okay? If I don't know, again, I don't want to go into Chabad too much and so on, but you can find things in the Tanya and in other places ideas about how man's actions could have cause and effect that he's not aware of in other realms of reality, and how he can construct new avenues for this, for more effects or more greatness. And this is the entire Chabad Lubavitch project. Okay? And I'm not talking about the political, sociological, but again, I'm talking about purely religious side. Why do people go into this shlichut? Why do people go and gather mitzvot, melakti mitzvot? Because each mitzvah has a proper mamash meaning, ba'olamot. Okay? Now, they are creating this. This person was not supposed to make this mitzvah, observe this Shabbat. He was a chiloni, he was not affiliated, he was mitbolel, he was assimilated, whatever. They've changed reality. They've changed reality, and then they changed the olamot hadinim. When we're constructing our own world, our own narrative, within Torah, throughout Torah, with Torah, we are creating something. HaTorah shebe'al peh, the oral law, okay, is being taught by the sages, being taught by the rabbi, being taught by the students until today. Okay? That is what validates, that is what creates the Torah shebichtav for us. Not that the Torah shebichtav needs us. It existed before us. But in our world, in our reality, in our daily life, in our mundane daily life, we are constructing it throughout Torah Shabbat. We are constructing the Torah. To say it differently, and I think it will be to close this and to open everything, because this is we're only touching on the surface here in these 6 sessions, right? We've only sort of took a very small pencil and sort of took 1 point or 2 points from everything. But to say this, when we really are sincere within our narrative, then our narrative is not only reducing our level of belief, it is actually creating our belief. And being aware of this does not lower our ruchaniyut, or spirituality, or frumkeit, or believe in providence and our belief in Torah and mitzvot, but it's actually enabling us to control it, to hold it, and to view it as something individual that belongs to us, that is personal. Because the Torah becomes personal because we are creating the world which within the Torah lies. This is all for today. I hope it was clear. Of course, people that are viewing us later are free to text me as in the past. Thank you for those who participated with us online. Thank you for those who are watching us online or listening to us. We'll have more later after the Chagim podcasts, shiurim, and other options for the English speaking crowd. And for now, Chag Sukkot Sameach. I hope this, when we go into the Sukkah, which is a real Chag of understanding where is providence, right? Like putting yourself within Hashem and going out from your 4 concrete walls. We'll take at least some of the sources here and reread them and try to understand them. And maybe we'll all have Shana Tova v'Bori'ah, a healthy and good new year for all of us. And Shana Tova, להתראות.